Welcome back. Now, before we get into the next video where we're going to build some of these components and actually start making our app, I want to go over something. You notice here that we're rendering this app, which isn't HTML, but our own custom component. That is, we're importing this app file, which is app.js. And don't worry about this code. This is something that we're going to write later on. But we see over here that we're returning, under the render, some HTML. Now, the way React works is that we can combine these HTML-like elements, such as div or h1, but also create our own custom ones, like search box or card list. And just like we saw on our developer tools with React, these components, we have capital letters, and I've used some highlighting here so that it doesn't highlight them. You can see the difference between a component that we build, which starts with a capital letter, and a component that comes pre-built in React, which are like HTML, div, or h1. These are lowercase. And as you remember with the React component architecture, all we're doing is just creating and combining these Lego blocks together. And the syntax is either using the class syntax with a capital letter. So now we can use the app component. Or if we go to something like search box or card list, let's do search box. Again, we won't have this here, but we will build them over the next couple of videos. You'll see that here I have a different way of building a component. And this uses just an arrow function. So remember when we first did the Create React app, how we had function, search box, or in our case, we had the app. That in here, we returned some JSX, like h1. Well, this is the same thing, except that we're using the arrow function way. So there's two ways like this of creating components, the class component and functional component. Now, that's something that we're going to get into a lot because it's an important concept in React and has some implications, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. The key here is to realize that we have, for now, two ways of building components, either just as functions like this, again, using capital naming system, or using classes like this. And both of these, no matter what, always return some sort of JSX for us, some sort of React elements. Now, another thing I want to mention is the folder structure that we're going to build throughout our course. And a good folder structure is really, really important on any project. As projects get bigger and bigger, as we get more and more JavaScript files, things are going to get complicated. So we need to be organized. So we're going to be structuring our app like a lot of professional React developers are, so that we stay organized. And what you'll notice here is that Ihua, when creating components, likes being very explicit. That is, if a component in this component folder has JSX in it, he actually ends the file with .jsx. And you see we have that little React icon. If I go down to the bottom over here, you see that it's JavaScript React. So JSX simply means it's JavaScript, but with this JSX syntax. Now, if I change this to a simple JavaScript file, it's still going to work. It's why app.js still works the way it does. And this is actually just personal preference. This is how Ihua enjoys organizing his code, because this right away, I can look at it and say, oh, this is a React JavaScript or JSX file. But at the end of the day, remember, Create React App takes everything through Webpack and Babel. We'll actually convert this JSX file into a JavaScript file. So whether you do JSX or JS, it doesn't really matter. Maybe your editor will help you with an icon, but that's about it. It's just personal preference. It's all about structuring your application in a way that's easy to understand. That makes sense. Even the naming convention here is important, where, again, just by looking at the file, even though it's in the components folder, right away I know, oh, yeah, this is a component and this is the style for the component. Now, These styles, these CSS files that we're going to be writing, and trust me, we're going to be writing a lot of them. At the end of the day, what happens underneath the hood is that Create React App combines everything all together. And if you remember, if we go back to our test folder, when we run npm run build and we go to the CSS file, you see over here that we have a chunk of CSS with a .map. This is a source map, which just helps us debug our code in production. But we have just one massive CSS file. And that's what Create React App does. Even though we'll have different CSS files in our workspace, in our source folder, at the end of the day, when we release to production, all of these are going to get combined together. And although we're still early in the course, although we haven't really built out these components, I want you to start noticing these things. As we build things, we're going to be thinking about how to stay organized. Instead of just having all the files in one directory, instead of not having any organization, right from the beginning of the project, we're starting to think about how we want to architect it. And this is an important principle that we're going to take with us throughout the rest of the course. Let's keep going.